So just some basic vocabulary that may be helpful later on. We're going to be using these words as we talk about the kingdoms and why we put things in different kingdoms. You have that just for your reference. But taxonomy is a science of basically classifying or grouping things according to similarities and differences. Taxonomy is a study of classification. And you know, humans by nature put things in categories. They group things together. And so this has been done for a long, long time. But our modern system was sort of solidified a couple hundred years ago. We'll talk a little bit about that. But we classify organs to sort of see how they're similar. Classification of organs can tell us why certain things are similar, how closely related they are, and so on. And one of the people we call him the father of taxonomy was a guy called Carl. He was Carl von Linné. He was Swedish. He eventually changed his name to sound more Latin because he really liked Latin, and we'll talk about Latin in a second. But Carl Linnaeus gave us our modern system of classification that we still use today. He came up with this system of binomial nomenclature. Now, do I have any Latin students here? Okay. So nomen means what? It's on every paper probably. Right, it means name. Okay. How about the prefix bi?
Two.
So binomial means
Two names.
We already know this.
Nomenclature is a system for naming things. So it means a two-name naming system. And in binomial nomenclature, every species that has been identified gets a name, a unique name that has two parts to it. Out there is a birch tree in the courtyard. That scientific name is Betula caprifera. No. This white pine tree is Pinus strobus. Okay? So, different species have different scientific names, and they're unique. What's the scientific name of humans?
Homo sapiens.
Homo sapiens.
Yes.
Okay? And we'll talk a little bit later about how we write them, but we capitalize the first word, we don't capitalize the second, okay, and it's always italicized or underlined. And so when you start hearing some of these scientific names, they all are written basically in Latin. They have Latin roots. And Linnaeus chose Latin as the language for these scientific names. Anyone know why, or can guess why? What would the benefit of using Latin be? Antonio?
It's a dead language, so
Okay.
you can't change the words.
Yeah, that the words in Latin, because where do people speak Latin today as their everyday language?
There's this one
Nowhere.
little town that still speaks Latin.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called, but it's in like Italy.
Oh, you're talking about Vatican City?
Yeah.
Is the seat of the Catholic Church, and Latin is used in communication somewhat, but not really generally spoken as like somebody's everyday language.
They still use it.
Yeah, it's still used. So Latin is a language sort of set, and the words are the words, and it doesn't really change. Whereas in English or German or Chinese, then the words, because they're being used, kind of the words change in what they mean. New words are added, words stop being used. So the language is always changing, whereas in Latin it's not. So that's one reason. There's another reason as well. Shane, you know?
Because like Latin is like the base of lots of languages, so they're all kind of similar.
Yeah, Latin is the base of Romance languages, and that's common to many languages that people speak. But also, because nobody uses it as sort of their everyday language, scientists from around the world can agree on it and can use the same term for the same species. You know, if you talk about a pine tree, a white pine tree, like the Pinus strobus out there, well, in English we would call it a white pine. In Germany they would have another word for it. Okay? In Puerto Rico they have another name for it. In Japan they have other words for it. So you could be using different words, but talking about the same thing, and it could be unclear. Whereas if you talk about Pinus strobus, well, whether a person is from China or Brazil or Germany, they're going to be using that same scientific name for it. Scientists that study trees all know those names, and so they can use the same term. Okay, so scientists throughout the world can agree, and it doesn't favor one culture, one nation, or another, because it's a language that's not really used by any country. Now the names that we use in our everyday word, saying dog or cat, mouse, pine tree, those words, we call those the common names in our language for those species. But often they can be misleading, like jellyfish. Is it a fish?
No.
No. It also does not taste good on toast. So it's a misleading name. A seahorse is a very tiny aquatic horse? No.
Nobody knows.
No. No,
But
not
it
at all.
looks like
It's a fish.
Maybe it turns
It may
into
look like
majestic.
one, but it's a fish.
Maybe it turns into a
That's why
majestic
it's
water
called
horse like
sea
nobody
horse.
sees.
Because it's
A tiny little horse.
sea
No,
horse.
SpongeBob rides all the time.
Swimming horse.
Ringworm is a skin infection, but it's not a worm at all.
Ew, that's
Caused by-
disgusting.
It's caused by a
That
fungus.
is sexy. Think about it.
A starfish, not a fish. Okay, it's an echinoderm.
That's why you call it a sea star.
Patrick Star.
It's not a star either.
It's an entertainer.
Yes, it is. It's in the shape
It's
of
not a burning orb of hydrogen and helium.
Oh, you
When
got
it's shaped like a-
All right, so
That's
sometimes
how
common
stars
names
look
can be misleading.
How do you know, Sebastian?
Have you guys seen, have you seen the Roadrunner cartoons before?
Yeah.
You know, at the very beginning, they're running by at the very beginning, they freeze frame them like somebody took a picture, and then they put like a name below them. Those are jokes. So the Roadrunner is a real bird. Its actual scientific name is Geococcix californis. A coyote is obviously a real mammal. It's Canis latrans is the scientific name. But on the cartoons, when they freeze them, they give them fake scientific names that are sort of like a joke. Like Accelerati increditus, that's one that they've used for the Roadrunner. Or Disapurius quickius, Verdius tastius. So again, those look like scientific names. Why? The endings, because they have those sort of Latin endings, and they're written in italics or they are underlined. Roadrunner digestus, Appetitus giganticus, Edius verdius. So those are just jokes that if you sort of know about scientific names, then they can be funny. All right, let's just watch this little video clip here.
Until the great ages of exploration in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, people had no idea of the immense variety of plants.
Shared this planet with us. Aristotle, the first scientist to attempt a scientific classification, found room for about 600 species of animals. As late as 1600, only 6,000 species of plants were known.
By contrast, today, over 2 million species of living things have been described. For biology, one of the most important of the early investigators was a poor Swedish boy named Carl Linnaeus.
Linnaeus hated school, but he loved plants. As a young university student, he left on a field trip to Lapland to collect plant and animal specimens. The 4,600-mile trip cost him only $100. But the knowledge gained on the trip paid off handsomely for himself and for mankind. A few years later, Linnaeus published his first book, Systema Naturae. It was so popular he became a great celebrity. In this book, he proposed a classification system for plants and animals that is still in use today. All living things, he suggested, should be grouped into species, genus, order, class, and kingdom. Later, he invented the binomial nomenclature system as well. Each kind of living creature would be assigned a double name in internationally accepted Latin. Genus first, species second. For the first time, system and order were being brought into the study of the living world. And as more and more plants and animals and microscopic creatures were discovered, the question was, why? Why are there so many different kinds of living things? How are they all related to one another? And with the discovery of more and more fossils in the 18th and 19th centuries, new questions were added. Why did so many creatures that used to live on Earth no longer live here? And what relation is there between these animals and plants that left behind their bones and imprints with present-day animals and plants?
All right, so Linnaeus gave us much of what we use as our modern system. And so species are classified in different groups. We call these taxa. And these taxa go from very, very large groups that have millions of species in them. And as you go down, they get more and more specific. So you're going to have to memorize these, and give you a couple ways to do that later on. The top level of classification is domain. Every single living organism on Earth is in one of 3 domains. So obviously those must be huge groups with millions and millions of species in them. Okay? That's the biggest group. This is actually one, sometimes people don't learn about it because it's a more modern system, that it's only been really developed over the last 30 years or so. Before that, the top level was kingdom. And that's the next. And again, there's 6 kingdoms. Some scientists use more than 6, but we're going to talk about the 6 kingdom system. From kingdom, we go down. The next group down is phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, so those are our 8 taxa, our 8 groups of classification. And as we go down this list, from domain down to species, the number of organisms in each group gets smaller and smaller until at the species level, there's just one thing in each group. Now you have to make a change here. Okay? The relatedness of organisms, well, it increases as we go down, or if you want to keep decreases, you can put the arrow at the top, either way. So as we get down, if 2 things are in the same genus, they're closely related. If they're in the same kingdom, they're not necessarily that closely related. And we'll look at that in the next slide.
What?
You can either put an arrow at the top and leave it the way it is, or you can put the arrow at the bottom and change decrease to increase.
What about like?
All right, so let's look at how this works. Here I have, this doesn't include domain, but here we have 7 different organisms. A grizzly bear, black bear, panda, red fox, squirrel, a snake, and a sea star. All of those things are in one kingdom. They're all in the kingdom Animalia. Okay, they're all animals. Okay? So obviously, things that share a kingdom may not necessarily be very closely related. Starfish and a panda don't seem very similar, but they're still in the same kingdom. We go down another level, go down to the phylum level. Okay? These things are in the phylum Chordata. Okay? And guess what makes them, what they have in common? So the sea star is gone. So that's in a different phylum.
They're all land animals?
No, I mean, they are, these ones are, but that's not what chordata means, but that's a good guess. These are the animals with a backbone. These are the vertebrates. Okay, if we go down to class, These organisms are in the class of Mammalia. Yeah, these are the mammals. So again, now the snakes, that's in a separate class. Going down another step further, order Carnivora. Yeah, these are the meat eaters. Family Ursidae.
Bears.
Yeah, this is the bear family. Does anybody know constellations? Ursa what? Major, Ursa Minor. What are they? Which constellations are those?
Bears.
Yeah, they're named after bear.
And there's a Pokemon called Ursaring.
Ursa means bear. Is it bear-like?
Yes.
Okay. Genus, now we're getting very specific. So the three bears are in the family Ursidae.